Hey everybody, I haven't done a narrated video upload for many months, and I've been lately doing some reading on Egypt, watching some good videos, and I came across a good website here, good story, and I thought I'd share it with you. This has to do with the Great Pyramid and the human body, but first of all I'd like to talk about what they call the Canon of proportions. Whenever the ancient Egyptian artists sculptured, inscribed, or painted figures, their proportions would be determined by a canon of proportions. Up until the end of the New Kingdom's 26th dynasty, the ancient Egyptians used a grid that measured 18 units to the hairline or 19 units to the top of the head. The height of the figure was usually measured to the hairline rather than the top of the head, because the top of the head was often being concealed by a crown or a headpiece, making it difficult to base a canon of proportions on. And very simply, when you overlay the grid on the figures, it was 19 squares high or 18 to the hairline, and always the navel was at the top of the 11th grid, or the 11th square of the grid. So what significance does that have? A lot of us are familiar with this view of the Great Pyramid's internal chambers and passageways, and this is looking from east to west. A lot of us have seen this and are familiar with it. Well, let's look at it from south to north. Just the internal passageways and chambers, and this is what it would look like. Now that 11 to 18 ratio that they use for the human body also works in the Great Pyramid. From the bottom of the subterranean chamber to the top of the Campbell's chamber, which is the chamber right above the King's chamber, the tallest in the Great Pyramid, it's 180 cubits. The top of the Queen's chamber comes in at exactly 110 cubits, so that 11 to 18 ratio was working there too. And also from the top of the King's chamber down to the subterranean chamber, if you put a grid of 18 squares, the entrance to the Great Pyramid would come in right at the top of the 11th square. So once again we have that 11 to 18 ratio working there. Here we have a depiction of a figure from the 3rd dynasty. This is Osiris. He was a physician, and this is how he was depicted. And using that 18 grid system, you can see right at the top of the 18th grid here matches up with the hairline, and the 11th grid coming in right at the navel right here. Well, if you take that south to north view of the Great Pyramid's internal passages and chambers and overlay it on this figure, it looks like this. And you can see here, right at the hairline, matches up at the top of the 18th grid with the top of the King's chamber, and the 11th grid that matches up with the navel just happens to match up with the pyramid's entrance exactly. So there you have an overlay that gives you a real good correlation between the Great Pyramid and the human body. Now I'm going to talk about the Tet, or the Djed pillar. It is the old, I think I'm pronouncing that right, but it is the oldest symbol of the resurrected God and was of great religious significance to the ancient Egyptians. It is a symbol of his backbone and his body in general. The Djed is represented on 2 ivory pieces found at Helwan dating to the 1st dynasty, evidence that the use of the symbol is at least that old. In these early times it is said that Osiris was probably represented by the Djed alone, and that he had no other form. Alan Gardner describes the Djed as a column imitating a bundle of stalks tied together and ascribed to its meaning to be stable and enduring. Other possible interpretations are that it represents a segment of the backbone of Osiris, a tree trunk with its branches lopped, or the 4 supports of the sky combined in one pillar. The legend of Osiris told to us by Plutarch describes the death and resurrection of the Osiris. His body becomes concealed in the trunk of a magnificent-sized tree. The king then chops down this tree, and the part containing the body of Osiris is made into a pillar for his house. The basic themes of the legend are preceded in the pyramid text in such utterances as number 554, in which the body of Osiris becomes enclosed in the trunk of a tree and is associated with the Djed pillar. Now, the internal chamber system and connecting passageways of the Great Pyramid viewed from the south or the north bear a striking resemblance of a crowned man facing the setting sun, his legs buried underground like the roots of a tree. The appearance of the 4 granite layers situated above the ceiling of the king's chamber are also reminiscent of the 4 blades that form the top section of the Djed pillar, the crown of Osiris. And that is right here. This is called Osiris Djed. That's what this symbol is called. The image contains the same elements of the legend of Osiris, the body of Osiris inside the pillar in the house of the king. And here we have an overlay of this man facing the setting sun. And you could say that the Djed crown, or whatever, there is a striking resemblance. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, pretty interesting, and maybe there is a correlation to the Great Pyramid and this top Campbell chamber, I think it's called, and the Djed pillar that is right here on the left in the blue. The dual function of the pyramid to personify the body of the dead king as Osiris and at the same time represent the solar mountain or pillar is apparent in the structural design of the Great Pyramid. The diagram of the complete internal layout of the chambers and passageways as viewed from the south depicts what appears to be a colossal figure of Osiris combined with the Djed pillar standing inside of the pyramid. This is the place where the king will again be conceived and reborn as expressed in another claim made by the ancient Egyptian kings found in the first chapter of the Book of the Dead. I am he of the Djed pillar, the son of he of the Djed pillar. I was conceived in Djedu, I was born in the Djedu. The enclosing of the body of Osiris in a pillar inside the house of the king and his subsequent regeneration is described in the legend of Osiris and supported by various parts of the pyramid text. The body of the king, the body of Osiris, and the pyramid of the king were considered by the ancient Egyptians as being synonymous with one another, as we saw in the above utterance from the Book of the Dead. It follows that if the king is Osiris and his pyramid is Osiris, then by constructing the chambers of his pyramid in such a way that they form an image of the resurrected Osiris, they ensured his own resurrection. Now, the king's chamber, or the house of the coffer. Now in ancient Egypt, Neb-Sokar meant Lord of the Coffer, and is a title of Osiris and the name of the figure placed in the tomb. A slight variation of this word is Neb-Sokart, which means house of the coffer. The house, determinative hieroglyph in this word, replaces that of God. The house of the coffer later became the place in which the Djed pillar was worshipped. According to tradition, Neb-Sokart was located in the portion of the Djedu where the jaws of Osiris were preserved. Once the depiction of Osiris Djed is realized in the Great Pyramid's internal chamber system, it can be observed that the figure's jaws are located in the western half of the king's chamber, the very position of the granite coffer in the king's chamber. And here we have an overlay of the king's chamber and the coffer on the overlay is located right at Osiris's jaw or mouth. So that is very cool. So just to recap, we have this 18 block grid system that the ancient Egyptians used to measure the human form. And when you overlay the internal passageway and chamber system, it matches up with the hairline to the top of the king's chamber, the pyramid's entrance to the navel, and the navel of Osiris is a significant thing in ancient Egypt. And the crown, or at the top of the head, in the Campbell chamber, you have these 4 different layers, which look just like this ancient Djed pillar, really the first symbol of Osiris. And it says, physically entombed in the pyramid, the dead king became identified with Osiris, the divine father of Horus. The pyramid complex was, in one sense, a temple complex to the Horus-Osiris divinity, merged with the sun god in the central icon of the pyramid, the embodiment of light and shadow, and the union of heaven and earth, encapsulating the mystery of death and rebirth. The pyramid was above all an icon, a towering symbol. It has been said that the Egyptians did not distinguish between hieroglyphic writing, two-dimensional art, and relief carving, sculpture, and monumental architecture. In a sense, the pyramids are gigantic hieroglyphs. And here you just have a basic form of the pyramid looking from south to north and what it looks like. So, I just thought that was very interesting. This is pyramidofman.com. I'll leave the link below. There's been many theories put out there about the pyramid. I thought I'd throw this out there. I found it interesting. Hope you did too. Have a nice week.